Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Speaker, clearly tonight this debate is carrying a great deal of emotion on all sides, and I applaud the Minister of Employment for his comments. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said numerous times that the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, poses a global threat. If Canada and the U.S. view ISIL as a threat, one can easily imagine how it is viewed amongst countries in the region. ISIL has made no secret of its expansionist views. For Iraq's neighbors and Canada's friends in the region, ISIL is not a long-term threat. It is an immediate and very direct one. After standing on the front lines with Kurdish Peshmerga soldiers, our Minister of Foreign Affairs witnessed firsthand what it feels like to be within shooting range of these terrorists. It comes as no surprise that ISIL's recent advance in Iraq has caused many countries of the region to reframe their priorities. ISIL's extremist violence has resulted in common cause among Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, and Israel, among others. Like Canada, these states consider terrorism to be the single greatest threat to the region. This includes both Sunni extremist groups like ISIL, the state-sponsored terrorism of the Iranian regime, and its proxies and allies, including Hezbollah. Currently, ISIL controls significant territory in both Syria and Iraq. ISIL is moving fighters and equipment and weapons between the two countries without consideration for international borders. In both countries, it plays an equally destabilizing role. In both countries, it has generated unprecedented humanitarian catastrophes. But the situation in Syria is very different from the one in Iraq. There is in Baghdad a government which Canada and its allies can work with, a government whose aim is to protect its people, not to slaughter them. That government has asked for the support of the international community to defeat ISIL. If Iraqi security forces, supported by an international coalition, manage to halt or reverse ISIL's gains in Iraq, ISIL will likely continue to threaten Iraq and other states of the region from its bases in Syria. Canada welcomes intensified U.S. efforts to destroy and degrade ISIL's capabilities in the region. Iraq also shares a border with Iran, the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. Iran must share the blame for creating this crisis in the first place. Its support for the murderous Assad regime, its constant regional meddling, its arming of Shia militants, and its bankrolling of terror are not exactly contributing to stability and security in that region. Despite a so-called, quote, charm offensive by the Iranian leadership over the past year, the toxic reality of Iranian meddling in Iraq remains. Iran continues to run its Iraq policies out of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force headquarters. The IRGC Quds Force, you will recall, is a listed terrorist entity responsible for some of the deadliest terrorist attacks of the past decade. This force, which is part of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, can only compromise efforts to bring peace and stability to Iraq and the region. It is arming Shia militias within Iraq, which undermines attempts by the new government to gain the trust of its Sunni population. While the Iraqi government is trying to bring its people together, regardless of religion or ethnic group, Iran is promoting discord and violence among Iraqis. Iran is sowing the seeds for a longer-term conflict, one that risks inflaming sectarian tensions throughout the region. Thankfully, other countries in the region have stepped up to the plate on a constructive and very important role. The Gulf countries have roundly condemned and rejected ISIL's disgusting brand of terror. Last week, Saudi Arabia hosted a meeting in Jeddah attended by 10 Arab foreign ministers and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. The meeting resulted in a commitment by the group to a coalition to counter ISIL's presence in Iraq and Syria. The group stated that participation would include, quote, as appropriate, joining in the many aspects of a coordinated military campaign against ISIL, end quote. The Arab League also met earlier this month and agreed on the use of all necessary measures to counter ISIL. Indeed, our friends in the Gulf and elsewhere in the region recognize, as we do, that countering ISIL and its despicable brand of terror will require a combined international effort. Gulf countries have also provided generous assistance to address the humanitarian crisis caused by ISIL. Saudi Arabia, for example, contributed over $500 million of humanitarian assistance to Iraq. Saudi Arabia's highest religious authority, its Grand Mufti, has unambiguously condemned ISIL and al-Qaeda, describing them as the enemy number one of Islam. Last month, it also donated $100 million to the United Nations Counterterrorism Center, the UNCCT, for efforts to combat terrorism. Another of our close partners affected by ISIL's campaign is Turkey, which represents a beacon of stability in a fracturing region. ISIL is a serious threat to the security of our ally. Iraq is also Turkey's second largest export market, so the economic consequences of the crisis have been severe. Turkey has also been steadfast in condemning the brutality of the Assad regime in Syria, and it has, like Jordan and other countries of the region, selflessly hosted millions of Syrian refugees. As a fellow NATO ally, Canada looks forward to continued cooperation with Turkey in responding to the threats of our collective peace, including the threat represented by ISIL. Mr. Speaker, ISIL's violence has had tragic consequences in the region. The atrocities it has committed on innocent civilians in Syria and Iraq, including the use of rape as a weapon of war, have resulted in the displacement of religious and ethnic minorities who have occupied this region for thousands of years. But ISIL does not intend to stop there. It has made the region a magnet for terrorists and aspires to expand its so-called state beyond Iraq and Syria, into Jordan and into Lebanon. Such expansion would not only have disastrous humanitarian consequences, it would destabilize the sectarian, ethnic, and political map of the Middle East, with consequences that we can only hardly imagine. That is why we need to act together with our allies and friends in the region to counter ISIL and support an effective, inclusive, and representative federal government in Baghdad, one that will govern for all Iraqis and preserve the rich and centuries-old fabric of this region. And finally, we will continue to push for an effective, inclusive, and representative federal government in Baghdad through our programming and diplomatic actions. Several members of the international coalition which is forming against ISIL were present at yesterday's Paris conference on the peace and security of Iraq, including 10 countries from the region. Participants committed to supporting the Iraqi government by any means necessary, including appropriate military assistance. As we build this coalition, let us not forget that some of the countries in the region, namely Iran and Syria, have different agendas. Although they may currently claim to stand on the right side of history, these regimes only aim to replace one brand of violence with another one just as cruel. They cannot be part of the solution when they are, in fact, a large part of the problem. Canada is committed to working with countries that reject all forms of terror. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions or comments? Questions or commentaire? The Honourable Member for Etobicoke North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. He did discuss humanitarian aid, and I'd like to raise the plight of children one more time tonight. UNICEF is extremely concerned about reports of children and women. Children are being abducted by ISIL in areas under their control, and we also have recruitment of child soldiers. As of September 8th, some 195 cases of grave violations have been verified and referred to support. Thousands of children have witnessed abductions, summary executions, and torture. These children require immediate attention to support their mental health. In Dohuk province, there are 1,100 schools. 700 of these are occupied. UNICEF is calling for these schools to be vacated. Support is urgently needed for innovative approaches to reach Iraqi children with education. The government has given $28 million in humanitarian aid. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has said it's insufficient. My question is, will the government give more, and what form will it take?
The honourable member for Don Valley West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague opposite for her comment. Clearly, as we've heard tonight, and we just heard from Minister of Employment a few minutes ago, speaking to the humanitarian crisis as it exists, as it affects children, as it affects families. And as we know, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs stated, our commitment to this point in humanitarian aid is insufficient, and I'm quite confident will be topped up with hundreds of millions of dollars pouring in from other corners of the globe with friends and allies in the region. But my concern goes deeper than that, and while I worry for the children and I understand exactly what the member is articulating, this issue, it has far worse consequences as it unfolds unless we react more strongly. And we've heard from the Liberal Party tonight in their support of this direction, which I applaud them on. And I also applaud, Mr. Speaker, those members of this House who went to Iraq last week and who witnessed firsthand the atrocities and the evil that is permeating that region. And we have to do more. We have to react. Our government is doing just that, Mr. Speaker. And I think that as time progresses, we are going to see that we are on the right side of this argument, and we must assist our friends. Thank you.
Questions or comments, concerns or commentary? The honourable member for Goma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think that it's important to reiterate the fact that our leader, the NDP leader, was the only leader that actually took the time to come and speak on this issue tonight, compared to the Prime Minister and the leader of the Liberal Party, who didn't bother showing up on this important issue. So the question...
Order. We had this point of order. We had this point of order raised a short while ago, so I'll just take this opportunity to remind the honourable member that it's not parliamentary to point out the absence or presence. Well, I heard, I did hear the honourable member refer to a specific member, so I hear her apologizing, so I'll trust that she won't do it again. This is another point of order. The honourable member for Saint Gulf Island is rising on a point of order.
I am also the leader of a federal political party. I wasn't given the opportunity to have a speaking slot tonight, but I would like to have had such an opportunity.
The honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I think that we need to reiterate the whole issue here is that the government had indicated, the Prime Minister and his government had indicated that they would actually be ensure that Parliament would have a say, that this would be debated, and that we would be able to have a vote on whether or not future troops would be sent out on missions in instances such as this one here. So I think that I want to bring to your attention as well the fact that the Rideau Institute also called this the move reckless. Without a comprehensive strategy, it is a reckless step, and it is a step that I don't believe that Canadians want. So again, they are of the same opinion as us, is that we need to have a strategy, we need to have the details in order for us to be able to make an informed decision, in order for Canadians to be well informed about why we are sending our troops there. This is a government that has cut funding up to 61% in some of the departments, and this is a government that actually goes out and takes pieces or parts from museums to help offset our equipment. So again, you know, we need to make sure that we are prepared, and we need to make sure that we're doing it right.
The honourable member for Don Valley West has only about 20 seconds left to respond.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And having not heard a question in that series of comments, I just want to acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, that as Canada contributes to this crisis, we do so on behalf of the many, many minorities, the Christians Yazidis, Sufis, Shiites, Ahmadiyas, and so many others who are being traumatized and attacked mercilessly by this evil of ISIL. And Mr. Speaker, I applaud those nations who have become involved in this crisis to ensure that, to quote the President of the United States, we degrade and destroy ISIL so that the region can return to a normal balance of peace and long-standing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.